evening, familia. This is Ray Collazo, and you're watching and listening to the Bomba Live Found in Translation simulcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Found in Translation stacks truth about politics and today's hottest issues, and Bomba Live is the virtual Puerto Rican celebration. So this episode really will incorporate sort of both elements of our brand, of our podcast vision. Thank you so much for joining us. Your host, Ray Collazo. You can find, we really appreciate our live listeners as you guys are jumping on right now. Thank you so much for joining us. You can catch us anywhere live, Thursday nights, 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 o'clock in the mountains and whatever time it is in Arizona. La Nueva in Puerto Rico, let's not forget that. Every Thursday evening live on our Facebook and all our other social media channels. You can also catch this as a YouTube program on Found in Translation or Bomba Live's YouTube pages, as well as a podcast and a radio show every Tuesday at 11 a.m. This is rebroadcasted, this show, on WPPMLP 106.5 FM in Philadelphia. And you can catch that, if you're not in Philly, on the TuneIn app. So you can always look up WPPM People Power Media. On this Transitioning with Poetry edition of Found in Translation Bomba Live, later on the show, we're going to have Dr. Karen Jaime, a celebrated poet, who's going to discuss the legacy of the late, great Miguel Algarin, an iconic Nuyorican in the arts, and also the legacy of the institution that he created and birthed and is still thriving to this day, the Nuyorican Cafe. Talk about the legacy of Miguel from an artistic perspective, academic perspective, a Puerto Rican perspective, a Nuyorican perspective. This man truly was iconic and did so much for our community. We're also going to dedicate this episode to other people that unfortunately we lost this week, great champions of our community, family, big parts of the Found Translation Bomba Life family. We'll shout them out momentarily. And in a moment, we're going to bring on a great friend to the show. It's really overdue. One of the great Latino leaders we have in our country, great friend, Javier Cuebas, who was one of the senior Latinos and one of the most senior, if not the most senior Puerto Rican in the Joe Biden presidential campaign team. So want to get his reflections on what it was like, kind of give us an inside scoop on what it was to be a highly prominent Puerto Rican Latino organizer in the campaign, operative in the campaign, and also tell us what he sees as what we should expect from the Biden administration. It's going to be a great conversation. We'll mix in some music, we'll mix in some laughs and other information and other updates. But before we bring on Javier to the stage, I just wanted to mention to folks and remind people that I want to center us in this, and really just for all of us to understand that this is, while there is light at the end of the tunnel, we've talked about that, right? That the end of this year was going to seem daunting, but also there'll be light at the end of the tunnel in many ways. And we saw that in the electoral sense. But in the same way that, we're probably seeing 6 to 9 months from now, there being a return to normalcy to some degree, or hopefully a large degree with the COVID vaccine, we still have a ways to go, family. And right now is actually the worst of it. So if you look at the numbers, 200,000 people contracting in a day, 100,000 hospitalized. It's gone from a little under 1,000 deaths a day in about 2 weeks, to nearly 3,000 people a day who are dying from this scourge, this menace. And that's roughly the equivalent of who we lost in 9/11. And I don't have to tell y'all how we felt about that and what that meant to our psyches and the people that we lost, so many New Yorkers and others and people in D.C. that we lost that we knew, right? So we're having a 9/11 level catastrophe every day. And so, we're not here to relitigate all the reasons, but the bottom line is that I think we have to this is a moment for us to realize that part of it, not the biggest reason, the political leadership and the national leadership was the biggest reason, but that the United States has handled this so badly and we're still now in a worse position than ever in many respects, was because on some level we let our guards down and allowed ourselves to follow mediocre leadership, follow bad advice, follow misinformation. Most of us know what's going on here for real. And so I really want to challenge all of us. And look, we're all guilty of it, including myself. We all want to see our loved ones. This is our favorite time of the year. Puerto Ricans, Christmas started the day after Halloween. We're going to talk about that during the show. This is, our sacred time, our spiritual time, our family time. So we want to see our loved ones. We want to hug them, we want to kiss them. We want to be in our homes and it's cold weather and enjoying fellowship with them. But I just want you to all to understand that this is the time all of us have to step it up as leaders. And, the deep, dark secret of our society and our lives, and the thing that we try to impart here on Found Translation and Bomba Live, is that the reality is we're taught sometimes indoctrinated, but ultimately accept being followers in our lives. And what I try to put on here with the great leaders and thinkers and artists and entertainers and talented people that we bring on the show to have these provocative conversations is that you really have to, if that's the mindset you got right now, whether it's with COVID or other things, you really got to refocus yourself and say, I have to take leadership in my life. In this case of COVID, to protect our families, to protect our loved ones, protect ourselves, and to protect people barely will ever know, because you may be a carrier, but if you have a sloppy attitude about this, you may unwillingly pass it to someone who it'll have much more dire effects. So I challenge everyone during this blessed holiday season. I'm not saying don't see anybody and hide from your life, but be leaders in taking the lead on being safe and really think through how you're going to approach the next 6 to 9 months before we all get this vaccine. Thank you again so much for joining us. Let's bring on the stage someone that's a great friend to the show. For my money, one of the top Latino political operatives we have in this country. Un taino de verdad de Mayagüez, Puerto Rico, familia. Javier Cuebas. Javier, welcome finally to Bomba Live, brother. Felicidades, papá.
It is a great pleasure to be here with you and your listeners. Super excited about the opportunity. As you said, way overdue, but ready to actually have a wonderful dialogue and conversation about the campaign and about the great things that are ahead. Because this is, as many of the nominees have mentioned during their speeches after being introduced publicly by the President-elect Biden, we're back. America is back. And as they say in the business community, we're open for business once again. And it's an incredible feeling. Just as an example, I talked to my wife not long after the election. I said, we're going to, that we exaggerate the whole thing in Puerto Rico with the Christmas decorations. But as you can tell, we actually decorated the entire house way before Thanksgiving. So this is something that is of great significance to us because we're celebrating a historical moment for our country. And that moment was made possible because of our fellow Boricuas, particularly for you, from the people from Pennsylvania who actually brought it home, and actually Latinos in general in New Mexico, Latinos in Arizona, Latinos in Wisconsin, Latinos actually in Michigan, Latinos all over the East Coast. And many people don't know this, mi hermano, pero we have 100,000 Boricuas in Georgia.
Un montón de Boricua. Yeah, chacho.
Exactly.
I know like 8 personally on my Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
El primo so mío de Fort Benning until a few months ago. Absolutely.
Exactly. So a lot of people in the island are not aware of that, or people in the communities, because we very often end up talking about the large markets, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. We talk about Florida very often, but we actually forget that in the East Coast, in Georgia, those 100,000 Boricuas made a significant difference in a really, really close election. And for example, my home state of Virginia, we also have over 100,000 Boricuas now. And that all happened the last 10 years. The last decade has actually doubled, and in some cases tripled, our populations in many communities nationwide. There are Boricuas, as you know, in every single one of the 50 states. In fact, I was introducing 2 friends of mine earlier this week in Guam, because one of them was visiting, and I said, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so because, he's not far from you. And I'm introducing people in Guam, which is pretty far from where we are right now.
Seguro,
but
seguro.
Estamos en todos lados.
Seguro que sí. Un saludo, Lorraine Johnson, who actually allowed me to be on the Boricuas de North Carolina Facebook page. So I engaged with them quite a bit. There's over 100,000 Puerto Ricans in North Carolina. Helped make that a very close election, even though it went to Trump, but it was still very close, 67,000 votes in a southern state. So we have a lot of room to grow. A lot of positive things came out of this election. Javier, before we get into Biden and the political stuff, I want people to get to know who you are. Again, you're someone that has a great personal story that incorporates really a full, I think, of the Puerto Rican experience from the island here. So why don't you share with us a little bit about your journey that led for you being in a position to have a senior role in the Biden campaign?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm a Jíbaro. I am a Jíbaro from Mayagüez. My family on my father's side is from El Barrio Limón de Mayagüez. I grew up in the urban areas of Mayagüez because my mom is from El Barrio Paris, actually, which happens to be also the neighborhood where our congressman Joseph, now retired, Jose Serrano, grew up as a kid before the family moved to the Bronx. And in fact, my mom grew up with his cousins. And to me, being a barrio boy, as I always like to call myself, is of great significance to take full advantage of these opportunities. I'm a product of the public school system in Puerto Rico. I actually went to the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, El Colegio. So I bleed sangre verde, as we like to say, and for the alumni like your cousin Abner and many others who actually have been able to take advantage of an amazing educational opportunity at a fraction of the cost of the universities in stateside. So I have had the opportunity to be a full product of the system in Puerto Rico. Later in life, as a professional, I went to the University of Denver to get a graduate, basically for my graduate studies in international affairs. But I really, first and foremost, very thankful for the opportunities given to me in Puerto Rico on our beloved island, because that's how I became who I am. My mother was the biggest influence in my life. She's now rest in peace, and she's in heaven. And like many other people, my mother spent the last 7 years of her life in Orlando. And that's something that happened, and that connected me to the community because it was part of those chain migrations that many of us are part of. My stepfather's brother, one of them, he had quite a number of brothers and sisters, but one of them actually moved to Orlando for many years. And at one point, my stepfather decided, you know what, let's give it a try. We're going to Florida. I remember I was working for LULAC at the time, and I'm in Corpus Christi, Texas. This is way before the cell phones were as effective as they are today. And I remember hearing from my mom, "Oh, well, since you're gonna be in Texas, but we're gonna be moving." And of course, I'm thinking about, so what neighborhood are you gonna move to now? And she said, "We're moving to Orlando." And I was like, "Orlando, as in Florida?" and she said, "Yeah, we're moving there. Your stepfather made a decision, and we're going." And that gave me an extraordinary opportunity because I was actually a more DC-oriented guy until that point. But when she moved there in 1999, then you had in 2000 one of the most historical elections and controversial in Florida. And I was given the opportunity because of my friendships to actually work for the Gore campaign.
I remember.
And I was there for a few weeks, but then I connected with the community at a more personal level. I had my mother living there, so it was a very personal connection. And that actually really launched a new component of my career, not in the policy nonprofit management arena, but really dedicated to the politics. And one of the things that I started promoting early was culturally relevant and appropriate content and approaches to campaigns. And you have dedicated your life to that because people talk about, hey, you need to mobilize. And very often they talk about, we're really disappointed. Your community didn't vote for us. And I'm like, well, you didn't exactly talk to us. You basically just said we're running. And of course, you need to actually just follow us blindly like a zombie and go and vote for us. It's like, doesn't work that way, homie. So those are the things that actually I was able to learn early in 2000. You need to talk to people. You need to go voters to where they are. And that it opened a door into another dimension of politics. And that now 20 years later, I had the opportunity to be part of the most significant campaign in recent U.S. history where we actually have been able to regain the trust of the American people.
So we do fast forward in this celebrated career again in the nonprofit advocacy, policy, and political sectors, Javier. And you get this opportunity to work for the Biden campaign in a very challenging moment, not just because it's always, regardless of anything, it's always difficult to beat a presidential incumbent. There's obviously lots of noise, between, Trump is such, love him or hate him. He's a bigger than life figure and all encompassing, and it would be difficult for any opponent to get their message out there. And then COVID is also in the mix, right? So, and you also had, let's be honest about it, you had a lot of Latino activists that wanted more from the Democrats, from Biden, from, just this whole experience, to your point around. So when you got that opportunity, what did you feel was important to contribute in a way that was true to your roots in our community? Because, it's not just about being the Latino face. It's about bringing value and having the campaign reflect what you were hearing in our community, which was we like what we're hearing, but we need more of it, and we need to connect in a culturally competent way.
Actually, that's an excellent point, because that's one of the things I made it crystal clear when I got the call. As a matter of fact, I was ready to actually go into a nonprofit that offered me probably a dream job in terms of the doing issue advocacy in an issue that is labor related, something very close to my heart. And I'm ready to go. And all of a sudden I got this call when basically I'm literally a week away from getting the official final offer from the other organization. And they say, hey, it's so-and-so from the campaign. We would like you to consider coming on board. And it was actually to be the director of coalitions in Florida specifically. And I said, I'm definitely interested. I came recommended through local activists who wanted me to be part of the mix to bring us.
Javier, one of the things, and people that don't know you, I think one of the reasons I was so happy for you to be there is that you definitely are a bridge builder, consensus leader in our community, because con los Boricua, just start with the Puerto Ricans, there's so many interests, people all over the place, and on mucho niveles, the island politics, the U.S. politics, the Nuyorican island thing. So I think that was a very smart choice, and I shouted it out on here because I thought, look, before you got the job, I was saying people like Javier need to be part of this campaign because we need those kind of authentic leaders. So share with us, again, a little bit more about the experience.
Absolutely, and actually, I think that my great advantage is I'm an only child, so I always have to figure out how to make friends, because otherwise it's going to be very boring.
It's a good point.
So actually, I think I figured that out, and also my mother. I'll make the story later about how I learned from my mother about my people skills. But when they actually called me, one of the things that we discussed is, do we really want to engage with the community? And I had a very open and frank conversation with the leadership for Florida. I had like 6 conversations before the job offer came through. And it was like back to back every day. I had a different conversation for an entire week. And when it was imminent that I was going to get the offer, in addition to the dream job offer, my wife and I had been having conversations about the whole process, and we sat down and we said, there's no plan B. This is not an option A versus option B. We all need, if we can help with the campaign, we need to do it, period, end of story. Yeah. Because if we will not have won this election, only God knows what will have happened. Seguro. And some of the comments they're already making, like General Flynn and others that are like just outrageous. So and that's actually after a defeat. So imagine what will have come out if they will have actually won. And after we had that family conversation, we said, we're going to do this as a family, because it's going to be an engagement that is going to be all in 24/7. And that's what we did as a family. And I joined the campaign. I engaged. I developed a team in Florida. And one of the challenges that we had consistently was that same question that you mentioned. Leaders wanted real content. They said, well, we like Joe Biden, but we want to know what he's going to do for us. One of the things that sometimes people forget, particularly when they're dealing with communities of underprivileged communities of color, minorities in general, is the fact that it's not just that I'm a better choice. We are survivors. It doesn't matter who wins. We're going to figure it out, because that's who we are. That's where we come from. We are survivors. But what we really want to know, in order to give you the most important thing in a democracy, which is our trust, by granting you or giving you what my dad likes to refer to as a préstamo, we're going to lend you our vote. The one thing is, like, what exactly is it that you're going to do to improve my situation, my reality, for me, my community, and those I love. And those conversations were very deep. And what we did actually is that we really engaged. When I arrived at the campaign, we were in the low 60s to mid 60s in terms of the likely support of the Puerto Rican voters. And that was very worrisome because we needed to be at 70 or above to be safe. At the end of the day, and I have to be very thankful also because at the last 2 months of the campaign, I actually transitioned to headquarters to be one of the national Latino advisors. We were able to go from the 60s with the Puerto Rican community to 72% of the Boricuas who voted in Florida, they voted for Joe Biden. And in Pennsylvania, your home state, 75% did the same. And that's extraordinary because the record was with Hillary. Because, Hillary was like a household name in Puerto Rico. And then to be able to move that is because we were able to use culturally competent references. We launched the Hazlo por mí campaign. And that actually brought people to tears. Those were the videos that were actually recorded in Puerto Rico, that they were all over the internet, and actually in some channels, even the news, the newsroom decided to actually showcase them because they were emotional videos of people in the island asking their fellow Boricuas stateside to vote for them. We also I personally designed the parrandas to the polls. Everybody's very familiar, not everybody, people like you and me are very familiar with the Souls to the Polls, which is one of the initiatives by the African-American community to engage faith-based voters on Sundays and Saturdays by bringing them as congregations to the polls. What we did, we launched parrandas to the polls. We hired local pleneros in different locations. We empower leaders, and we said, hey, these are the basic guidelines. What we did also is that we mixed that with a series of caravanas that had been run from Miami. I had one of my team members, Chris Wills, who's Cubano con Venezolano. He had been doing caravanas for over a year on behalf of Biden. So he even had a set of guidelines. All of a sudden, these guidelines that we use, we integrated with the parrandas, and you probably saw some of the videos. We basically had a party, man, when people actually, in a very safe way, because we use social distancing.
No, and all the state, Tampa, Orlando,
exactly,
Broward, Miami-Dade. Let me tell you, Javier, I was looking forward to the weekends because I loved watching these. I love watching these caravanas because let's be fair, the other side had them too. Miami, the Trump people had some.
Oh my God, absolutely.
I mean, con ese estilo cubano and Venezuela. I mean, they were strong too. So it was. Florida had a very Latin American electoral flavor this year.
But this is the funny thing along those lines. All of a sudden, you have non-Latinos doing the caravanas themselves. I had requests from Minnesota, from the Hmong community in Minnesota, about how to use the guidelines, and they hosted a parranda. A caravana.
De verdad.
We had caravanas in Arizona. And then what people did, they gave them their own flavor. Some of them call them desfiles, they integrated horses, they make it very culturally sensitive to the reality of the local community.
So what you're saying is, when that group of Mexican Latinos in Las Vegas did that procession con lo caballo, that was something that came out of the Puerto Rican plan.
Many of those ideas blended to a way that is very hard to determine what started first.
But there was definitely a theme there
exactly.
And it was very viral. So even if you weren't in that state, you felt a part of the campaign. That was excellent. And we're talking to Javier Cuebas, a great political operative, great friend to the show, who's talking about his experience working on the Biden campaign. So let's fast forward a little bit, Javier, because, actually, I want to ask one quick question. What you mentioned the numbers, and obviously at the end of the day, there's been a lot of discussion about the South Florida and the Cuban and some of the other more conservative Latino groups that supported Trump. And let's be honest about it, Trump does have support in our community as well, the Puerto Rican community specifically. But what's one quick thing you would like to share about that experience in the Puerto Rican voters in Florida that we don't hear a lot about? There's a lot of headlines, a lot of 3 or 4 bullet points that are in every article and every discussion by people that don't understand our community for the most part. So what do you want us to know about the group that you worked with in Florida and what we need to know moving forward? Because we have to keep engaging the Puerto Rican vote in Florida for lots of reasons.
Absolutely. If you take the Interstate 4 corridor, all the way from Tampa to Daytona with Orlando in the middle that runs like this, if you take that out of the equation, Democrats beat the crap out of the other side. So if you actually just look at the I-4, where we have the highest concentration of Boricuas, it was a very different story. We flipped Pinellas County from Republican to Democrat. And Seminole County, which is the county that is northeast of Orlando, or Orange County, which is the county where Orlando is situated, we flip it, and that county has been reliably red since 1948. So when you look at numbers like that, vis-a-vis the entire state, you realize that the Puerto Rican community, our voting patterns were significantly different from the rest of the Florida story. So when it came to the Puerto Rican community, we are Democratic voters. We're not swing voters anymore. That, at least from this election, it's pretty obvious that Puerto Ricans feel extremely comfortable with democratic ideas. And we did the work in the Biden campaign, thanks to actually real support from people like Julie Chavez Rodriguez, who was deputy campaign manager. Jen O'Malley herself was incredibly supportive. I mean, there was a buy-in at the most senior level of the staff, and also by the candidate themselves. Kamala Harris had been to Puerto Rico 3 times prior to her being a presidential candidate, because she actually cared about what happened during Maria. She actually understood Puerto Rico. She was actually one of our advocates, as you well know, in Congress, in the Senate. Sure. You have then a person like Joe Biden, who deeply cares about the island, with an understanding of who we are, what we do, relationship with our leaders because of his years in the U.S. Senate. So we have people who believe in us. And that was actually a key moment that really helped us launch the path forward and go from the 60s and a timid support to like Puerto Ricans are all in, was September 15th. That is the day that Biden went to Kissimmee, Florida, in Osceola County, at the heart of the Puerto Rican community in the I-4, and basically discussed and presented his plan for Puerto Rico. And as you know yourself, the key word that we promoted and made it into the plan was respect. And that is what made the difference.
No, and in Javier, in Puerto Rican Spanish, respeto is such a powerful word. So I know that resonated. In los dos idioma, it resonated very strongly. No
Absolutely.
Question about it. We're talking to, yes. Yeah. No, continue. Finish up.
No, and that's what made the difference. Yeah. Because he showed respect. He brought high-profile artists, but that was not the entirety of what happened there. It was a rendition in front of the Puerto Rican community that we care, that what the Puerto Rican community, how he connected personally to the community. It was a day basically dedicated to our community. That has rarely happened. And when you look at the quality of the proposals and the specifics that are part of the plan, which has never happened before, at that moment, that's when we really captured the hearts and imagination of the Puerto Rican community. And after that, it was all grow in terms of support from the Puerto Rican community for our campaign.
And, and the last thing I'll say about it is that, I don't think it really came out the way I would have liked to have in the campaign. But I don't think we ever really, and you felt it. I know you felt people felt it when Joe got on the ground in Florida and other Latino Puerto Rican communities. But that even though it's a tiny state and a tiny population, that Joe has a long history with Latinos, especially Puerto Ricans. So as you know, I grew up in Philadelphia, and people know the geography. Wilmington, Delaware, which is like where half the population in Delaware is a half hour from where I grew up, like literally. So Joe was very much like a local elected official when I was a kid. And my parents were always activists and stuff. So I was a little kid. God, I wish I had these pictures of this. I would walk in Puerto Rican Day parades in tiny little Wilmington, Delaware, and with Joe Biden. Joe Biden would walk in the Philly Puerto Rican Day parade, in the 70s and the 80s and all that. So there's a history there. I saw him speak at many Latino events in the region over the years. So there's a history. There's a comfort level. He's got a lot of love for Latinos. He's Catholic. Culturally, there's a lot of synergy. His wife, Dr. Jill Biden, has really established a rapport and a real admiration for this new millennial Latino generation and her work at community colleges, particularly these DACA Dream students. Yep. So I think she's going to play a role in that, in promoting 2- and 4-year colleges and higher ed access for our folks. So it's not just a ceremonial thing. I think Dr. Jill's going to play a role in that. So Javier, I want to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to bring on another great friend to the show, Dr. Karen Jaime, who's going to talk about the legacy of the late, great Miguel Algarin and the Nuyorican Cafe. We'll talk a little bit about Puerto Rican culture, and we'll definitely get your thoughts before the end of the show about what we should look out for in a Biden administration for the Puerto Rican Latino community. You're listening and talking to a great friend to the show, un taíno de Mayagüez, un indio de Mayagüez, excuse me. More specifically, who's got an incredible backdrop here. If you're listening to the podcast, you're missing out on the full Javier Cuebas experience. We're going to play a great video. Un saludo, actually, this is a great shout out because Fabiola Mendez, Javier, you got to look her up, support her music. She is a cuatrista from Caguas, young woman. She is the only person who's ever graduated from the prestigious Berklee College of Music playing the cuatro. So she is a pioneer in many levels. She lives in Boston. She just got a very prestigious fellowship from a local foundation in Massachusetts to continue supporting her work. So we're going to play a clip of a recent appearance with Fabiola, get your reflections on the performance, and then we'll bring on a great friend to the show, Dr. Karen Jaime. The clip.
A escuchar, pero yo sí me encontré con un pajarito pequeño que mientras iba en busca el sol se topó conmigo y a mi oído cantó esta simple melodía, pero yo sí me encontré con un pajarito pequeño que mientras iba en busca el sol se topó conmigo y a mi oído canto esta simple melodía.
Javier, what a talent. Like I say.
Wow. That was beautiful. That was just beautiful.
So again, you talked about it. Puerto Rican starts celebrating Christmas, day after Halloween, basically. So when you hear music like that, the cuatro, give us the memories and the thoughts when you think about when you were growing up in the island of Puerto Rico at this time of year, brother.
Oh, absolutely. It reminds me of my family, first and foremost. My mother, my grandmother, who's still alive on my father's side, who is from El Campo in El Barrio Limón in Mayagüez. That is a great significance. That is who we are. Those are amazing memories that connect us. Along those lines, for example, one of the things that our research reiterated that you and I know, but the campaigns always have to do research to certify certain things, is that how significant are the patriotic symbols for Boricuas connecting to everything. How attached we are to the flag, which you can see in the background here at my home, here in my chest, el 21 de Roberto Clemente, right here.
I mean, we gave out the Vera Clemente award on the show. I mean, this is seminal. These icons in our, including Miguel, we're going to talk about. These are icons that are very important to us culturally.
And when you have talent like her, it reminds you of how extraordinary is an island that is as small as 100 by 35 square miles, and what we have given to the world in terms of gifts from the entertainment community to politicians, diplomats like Mari Carmen Aponte. We have scientists, we have legal minds como la jueza Sotomayor, our recent judge who passed away, who was actually in Boston, since she actually, our cuatrista has the Boston connection, and sorry, it escapes me the name right now. We have so many extraordinary members of our community. And the amazing thing about our community is the resilience. And El Cuatro, which is so unique to Puerto Rico as an instrument, is a reminder of that resilience, that we are who we are. We are unique. We know our space. And as we like to joke, you give Puerto Ricans half an hour, no matter where they meet, and they're going to find out who are their cousins, their neighbors, all the people they have in common. I like to joke with people that I met a friend of mine in Virginia when I was an intern. Actually, one of my cousins. And we didn't know about each other, but we had a wonderful lady who was introducing some of us interns to some of the locals. And she, el interrogatorio, she asked me everything possible about me and my family. She did that to everybody. All of a sudden, she said, Nene, come here. and she introduced me to a guy who had the same last name as my grandmother, which is not part of my actual my mother or my father's last name. And then he made a phone call, and we discovered that we were cousins in the middle of Virginia. And that's how Boricuas are. We get to know each other, we identify, and something as beautiful as El Cuatro, and also the element of music in our activism. The role, whether it's actually you have a cuatrista like her, or you have actually somebody like Daddy Yankee, or you have somebody like
the most streamed artist on Spotify this year in the world, Bad Bunny.
Bad Bunny. You have somebody like Bad Bunny who has taken to the streets to show that not only that he is a talented musician, but that he actually cares, explaining his ideas, putting at risk his reputation, because, it doesn't always go well for artists when they decide to be activists.
That's right.
For some may go well, but for some it's very risky.
So
that
Javier,
is significance.
That's right. So Javier, that's a great segue, because that's what we want to talk about now. We want to talk about how our artistry in many forms, but particularly poetry and spoken word, is incorporated not only in our life, in our expression, but in our activism and what it means to the history of our community. We want to bring on really the poet laureate of the Found Translation Bomba Life family, a fantastic friend, a great poet, a great academic and scholar herself, and also a great activist, Dr. Karen Jaime. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Poet laureate. Wow, I'm so honored.
Yeah, of the show. Yeah, I got to figure out what kind of trophy I got to get you to,
right?
So we can rock it in the back, because you are the poet laureate of the show.
Get a little background action.
Karen, you can always, we bring you on not only to share your poetry, which you were at my birthday show. You were so blessed to share an incredible rendition of one of your poems, but you really are the person that keeps us on the pulse of the spoken word community, the poetry community, and really what's going on with the New York art scene. And a lot of that came together with the sad passing of the iconic Miguel Algarin. So why don't we start, Karen, because in a moment, you're actually going to share a poem that well before he passed, you actually penned in his honor. So I'm really excited about that. I want to get Javier's reflections, because it really speaks to a lot of themes that we're talking about today. But why don't we just start with the beginning, Karen? Share with people who Miguel was and what the Nuyorican Cafe is and what it means to you and what his memory means to you.
Sure. I mean, Miguel was an incredible writer, academic, former professor of Shakespeare at Rutgers, right? We would think he was, and just, in the 1970s had, friends with Miguel Piñero, and was just having his living room overrun with writers, Pedro Pietri, all these cats getting together and sharing what they called the first draft poems. It wasn't about slam. Slam didn't exist yet. It was just about really sharing writing. And getting to the point where it was overflowing and moving to this place called the Sunshine Cafe on East 6th Street, across the street from his apartment. And then, just moving around, finally got to 236 East 3rd Street, where the Nuyorican Poets Cafe is still located, as a space for artistic practice, for the sharing of words, for all types of performance. We're talking poetry, theater. And Tazaki Shange actually participated in a theater festival there at the cafe, a performance for colored girls who've considered suicide when the rainbow isn't enough. So there was theater, poetry, music. Used to have later on in the 90s the Glam Slam with Emmanuel Xavier that combined sort of the house ball scene from queer communities with poetry slams. So there's a long history of art and art activism, right? Just the term Nuyorican itself is a reappropriation of a negative term taken on. The phonetic spelling of Nuyorican, you can really attribute to Algarin and Piñero in an airport in San Juan after doing a reading in Puerto Rico and reading something in English and, pretty much being told you're not really Puerto Rican. So just, the term Nuyorican, you can attribute that to Algarin and Piñero in terms of its phonetic spelling, right? As
wow,
really
I didn't even know that, Karen. You're dropping jewels, girl.
That's like laying claim to that, right? Like not New York Rican, right? But Nuyorican, like that's how we say it. We don't break it down like that. This is the phonetic spelling. This is a name for people who are, articulating the lived experience of the street, of what's going on in the community, right, within the ethnic enclave of Loisaida, not the East Village, not the Lower East Side, but Loisaida, those blocks, where, Puerto Rican migrants were, establishing community and establishing themselves in New York. I mean, the cafe used to have events in the early days that were like $2. So if you lived in the community and you didn't have a lot of money to go to that art gallery uptown or to, feel comfortable going to these different sort of high art spaces, you go to the cafe and it was right in your community, right? Like right down the block, there's this space where you can go. If you think of the actor Luis Guzman, great character actor, he started out in the Nuyorican as Louis Guzman, right? Like getting up and reciting a poem. And he was always, he's friends with Algarin. I saw him, a couple of years ago, just accompanying Algarin to this performance that we were doing down in the Loisaida Center. I had the pleasure of seeing Miguel maybe a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. And, he was old and he was older and his health wasn't what it used to be, but his commitment to poetry, to, performance, and to poetry as art activism and as a way to not just bring community together, but to empower community was still at the forefront. He's like, how can we do workshops? How can we do workshops with people? He was in a facility. He's like, how can we do workshops with these people in this dining hall? How can we think about ways to continue to engage with the written word? Because they never were just words, right? They were calls to action.
Well, it's so funny you say that because in reading the obituary, essentially, that was in the New York Times today, this quote from Miguel really stuck out to me. The only way to hold their cultural space is to start talking. And so I want to give people a context. In the 70s, when in the 80s, when Miguel was birthing this movement, you talk about, it ain't 2020, my friends. I mean, Puerto Ricans and Latinos at that time, because there was a Latino population, one Puerto Rican that was also part of this movement too from the beginning. Is that, Puerto Ricans were, you talk about on the bottom, and there was massive stereotypes, and some of the things you're talking about and derogatory language. And, we were SNL jokes, that was, and this was an expression for those Nuyorican, because they had so few spaces. There wasn't social media then. There wasn't, there was 3 national TV networks. Maybe Geraldo Rivera was a TV reporter on Channel 6 on one of the stations, and that was it. And, Rita Moreno movies. And so we had to create our own space with art. And as just a patron, my experience watching people like you and so many great people of our generation at the Nuyorican, but also seeing like Joe Bataan with my father and connecting our generations with music and seeing other forms of art at the Nuyorican over the years, comedy, all kinds of different types of expression. Why don't you talk, Karen? Because I think before we hear your incredible rendition of this poem you did in homage to Miguel, I want you to talk about his impact on the concept of intersectionality in the New York art space, because Miguel wasn't just for Puerto Ricans. He was for a very diverse set, and you spoke about him being a trailblazer and giving the LGBT community spaces and non-Puerto Rican minority groups spaces and other folks that weren't part of the mainstream Broadway art scene. So talk to us about how he was a pioneer for the concept of intersectionality way back when.
Right. Well, I think one of the things that, I always highlight and I always sort of put at the forefront of any conversation, Miguel was queer. That was a given. When the Nuyorican Poets Cafe as a space was founded, his boyfriend that he lived with, worked the bar, right? Richie August was also a part of one of the founding members of the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. If you go to the Nuyorican Poets Cafe website, you'll see that he's listed as a Nuyorican founding poet, right? And, the movement itself and the opening of the cafe and the people that were there from the beginning weren't all Puerto Rican, weren't all men, right? Like, I think, a very strong shout out needs to be, sent out to Lois Elaine Griffith, who was there from the beginning, who was very active, who was, in these years, these last couple of years, was the person that, along with some members of Miguel's biological family, but who was really Miguel's family, and who would visit him constantly. When we went to the facility, she's the person I would go with. And I think that in the early days of the cafe, Miguel really did bring all of these people together from the literary scene, the Amiri Barakas, the Allen Ginsberg, and Tashaki Shanke, all of these people to the space, because it was about bringing community together. It was about the word, and it was about the word as activism and really sort of challenging marginalization. Like you mentioned the fact that, thinking about that time period and sort of negative epithets and marginalization of Latinx communities. But I think it's also important to mention where the cafe is located, right? Miguel did not co-found this space in some ritzy neighborhood. It was in Loisaida, 1973, when you had the gangs, right? Like Miguel Piñero used to be a member of a gang. When you had the gangs proliferating the area, when, the crack epidemic was hitting hard, people walking over crack vials, right? And I'm not saying this to romanticize this. I'm saying to think about the space and the neighborhood as like, this is also the context.
That's right. And also the context of later on being on the front lines of gentrification.
Yes.
So how do the marginalized communities keep their space, especially in Manhattan?
And how did Miguel keep his space? Because this poem that I wrote in 2010 was about raising funds because they were trying to kick Miguel out of his apartment that he'd lived in for decades. Like his land, he had failing health, so you can't do the gigs, you can't do the other stuff to earn money. And the landlord's trying to kick, an artistic icon, someone that is the community, right? Like is part of the community, face of the community in many respects, kicking that person out of their apartment. Mm-hmm. So it's a fight against gentrification. It's a fight against marginalization, but it's also this like push towards erasure. Like, this space, yeah, that's great. Now we're going to sort of hipster it up, and we're going to start pushing you to the side.
Oh man, I remember being in college, Karen. We're part of that movement to push back on that hipster dynamic that was going on there. And I remember that even in the 90s, and then there was obviously a little time when it didn't exist, and then they rebuilt it and all that. But I do want to say that you just hit on, and then we want to hear your incredible poem, and I want Javier to have a chance to sort of comment on this conversation again on Poetic Transition, Bomba Live simulcast, talking about the legacy Miguel Algarin, is that, you just said so many things that connect, the historical connectivity tissue of Miguel. So you talk about Allen Ginsberg. I was talking about the beatniks with my sons yesterday, and just thinking about how Miguel made a space for Latinos and Puerto Ricans to be part of the literary canon of New York, literally. Thinking about that, right? Like, and then, there's no, do we have Pedro Pietri and these incredible Nuyorican artists, poems, and Jack Agüero, all these people, do we have them? Or are they the same prominence without Miguel and the Nuyorican? Not sure, right? And then, look, is there Hamilton without Miguel? Is there? I mean, just think about how he pushed the envelope and expedited this opportunity for Latinos and Puerto Ricans, particularly in New York and along the East Coast, to have these spaces. And just thinking about in Philadelphia, there is a taller Puerto Rican that was really inspired by what he was doing in New York City. Javier, before we hear this poem, just really quickly, just some thoughts on this conversation and the role of art in our culture.
Oh, most definitely, particularly with the written word. Very often what you achieve and what Miguel achieved, I grew up in the island. I didn't travel to the States until I was 18 years old for the first time in a college, as part of a college trip to New York. And I knew about the Nuyorican Cafe because it transcended the ocean. It actually also it transcended social class, because very often the written word allows for our talented individuals to bring people together. And all of a sudden you're connecting people, as it was described by Karen, that otherwise will not coincide in any space. But the arts bring them together. And all of a sudden you have an experience that actually, it actually blends in a way that once those fibers are united, there's no going back. And today in 2020, we have been able to harvest that reality that was actually created by him and the people who actually supported him. And now we have been able to enjoy that. Now we have moments like the ones I did in the campaign that made me laugh, where when we announced that, for example, that some Latino artists, particularly, for example, like Benito, actually said, oh, you can use one of the songs. And I have this non-Latinas going crazy in a Zoom call because all of a sudden their favorite artist, who happened to be Bad Bunny, is actually engaged. And you wonder, oh my God, how did that happen? It's because of the power of the written word, because it transcends culture and it transcends social class and it helps bring people together. And I'm very, very appreciative of being part of this conversation and meeting you, Karen, because this is culture. Esto es cultura viva. This is who we are.
Seguro. And I want to say two quick things on that. One is, so fast forward or backtrack to several years ago, maybe 7-8 years ago, when I go to Puerto Rico for something, and my cousins that grew up on the island, they take me to the Nuyorican Cafe in San Juan.
Mm-hmm. I've been there.
Because that was, I don't think it's there now, but there was a time where that really became a cutting edge place, because that was a way for island Puerto Ricans to honor that, the romanticism of that Nuyorican culture, and having a space like that on the island. And then, and so the culture is dynamic, to both of your points. And then the other thing I wanted to share is that, going back to this intersectionality conversation, Bad Bunny is in a place where he can push the envelope on sexuality and push our community to think about these issues and about inclusion and femicide on the island, these issues. Miguel was a pioneer in those, in that artistic movement that now Bad Bunny, in his way, with poetry and lyricism and pushing those conversations. So me and Javier could talk all day. We're going to get out of Karen's way. Karen, when I saw that you had actually, before Miguel's passing, had written a poem in homage to him, I said, well, Karen's got to come on the show. And you were so generous to share that you'll bless us with a live rendition of this poem. Tell us about the poem. And again, we'll step off the stage to hear this incredible rendition. And then we'll mention, I'll mention after the poem, the other ladies, the women who are on the scroll with Miguel that we're honoring as part of today's show, that we also lost recently, Sarah Rosario and Maria Perez, and I'll discuss them more after Karen's rendition. So Karen, tell us about this poem, and the stage is yours, my friend, as always.
Okay, so I wrote this in 2010. There was a benefit for Miguel in order to raise funds for just him fighting his eviction. And I just started writing, thinking about what Miguel meant in terms of the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, but really setting the stage for a lot of the people that came after. So this poem is entitled Poem for Miguel, The Living Room. There was the living room, and Rutgers, and then Tazaki, and Amiri, and Alan, and Lois, and Carmen, and Lucky, and Papoleto, and Mariposa, and Willie, and Keith, and Felice, and Hal. Even me. And who can forget Julio, and Pepe, and Rome, and Sam, and Mikey, whose ashes were spread throughout the Lower East Side, whose picture was in that nook right when you walked in with the candle. And Sadra, and Tato, and Bimbo, thank you for Loisaida. And we have East 3rd Street between B and C, and Adela's on East 5th, where you told me never to forget what I'm worth. And there's a night that Pedro died, your first feature on a Friday night, and you made sounds into words and brought us back to the days when it wasn't about scores, judges, trophies, or HBO. When it was about hearing a poem, thank you, Steve Cannon. When it was about having your voice heard and making it count. When there were no Latino lit classes, when Nuyorican was a bad word, when it was about the walkover junkies, when it was about Marcel and the banners in the attic, when it was about Nathan P. and Dot and Claire, whose logo is still used. When it was about Mongo Affair and Action and Maggie and Reggie and Edwin. When it was about El Reverendo and his church, when it was about the murals, not the movies, when it was about the rhythm in the streets and the movement back and forth, when it was Vaya poetry, before Ed wrote about living in Spanglish, before gentrification hit, before it cost double digits to get in, when it was just a dream and a way to clear out your living room, there was you. And then there was always Miguel.
So powerful. Javier, I'll start with you, brother. Some reflections.
Some people actually have an impact that sometimes is on purpose, but very often they don't realize how many people they help with their actions, with their words. As I mentioned before, written word transcends social class, gender. It transcends everything because it brings us together. It's actually, you have the opportunity to be yourself and express yourself. And it's our artists like Miguel who actually continue to bridge the community in stateside as well as those in the island. We can go back to Julia de Burgos. We can go back to others who they were always back and forth between our communities. And now, of course, you have a triangulation because then in Florida, you have those communities in Orlando, Miami, Kissimmee, Tampa. You have Boricuas everywhere. And the written word brings us together. And this new generation is extraordinary because of what people like Miguel were able to do. And now we have the Bad Bunnies on the world. And who knows what we're going to have 10 years from now in terms of those people who are going to be out there representing, but also making sure that the written word never dies, because it doesn't. It lives forever. And that is something extraordinary. And very few people have the opportunity to be remembered because of the words that they share. Because when they share words, they share themselves. And I'm very appreciative of this opportunity to be here tonight with you, Ray, and with Karen, and with your audience, because as a community, we have gone a very long way. We have achieved something extraordinary, politically, artistically, and in every area of society. We have reached a place that we need to figure out how we're going to keep it and keep expanding it, and making sure that our contributions and those of people like Miguel, who, by the way, Rutgers is also the alma mater for my wife, so I have one more thing in common.
Very nice.
Yeah, very nice. This is who we are. And once again, at the end of the day, the word that we used in the campaign was respect, but the word that actually permeated the entire conversation around Boricuas was resilience. Because if there's a community that is resilient, it's ours. And I think that Karen's poem and rendition to Miguel actually, would respectfully addresses that resilience through your words, because it's about who we are. We will always be there. As long as there are people who remember you, you will always exist. As long as there's a legacy through written word, you'll live forever. And that's something that artists bring with themselves that help us in ways that it's very hard. It's very hard not to embrace them and feel that you're part of the conversation when you listen to the spoken word or the written word like you just did, Karen. So thank you.
Karen, there's a couple of things. One is, God, you're such a talented poet. I think of, like when you're talking about, what gets me is when you come up with and especially Caribbean, because Karen's Dominicana, so I want to make sure everyone's clear. There's all fam here. Is that we're so good with these nicknames, and when you talk about people like Bebo, and and those kind of those how we use language, Caribbean Latinos in particular, the Spanglish and the and incorporate all these different influences in our language and how we communicate with each other and how we refer to each other lovingly, right? Is that you painted a picture and me thinking about, like, basically my life and like living in the hood, North Philly, and walking those streets and guys playing dominoes and maybe some people not doing what they were supposed to do, and the Jehovah's Witness knocking on the door, and and just the life and the language and mira and how we would express each other in tone and how we all lived on top of each other, but we're yelling for some reason. There's just, you painted a picture there for me, and it brought back those memories, and then it also painted a very New York picture, which, I was in and out of. I'd go to the Bronx, see fam and stuff, but I didn't grow up in New York. But so that also gives me that entree, right? And so speaking about not remembering the influence, Javier, I did want to mention this episode not only is dedicated to Miguel, but dedicated to two women that were very close to me, my family, and were great activists in New Jersey, in South Jersey specifically. Maria Perez was a Puerto Rican from Vineland. Javier, I know you're very familiar. That's a real Puerto Rican Jibara kind of community down there, deep in South Jersey. Most of those folks from Jayuya and those towns deep in the campo. But Maria Perez was a great activist, a great friend, a great supporter who we lost recently. Her sisters and her cousins. Shirley Santos is one of the producers of our show. Is her niece. And Shirley's from Comerío, I believe. So, just people I'm really close to, wonderful people, great activists, always involved in la política. Javier you would have loved working with Maria. And Sara Rosario, actually a Cathedral High School graduate, by the way, Karen. So, there's some synergy there. She was a New Yorker as a child, born on the island, lived her adult life in South Jersey, registered nurse, a part of my wife's family, just a wonderful person. And I want to share this story because this is part of the reason why we do what we do. So this was a retired nurse. This woman raised her family with her partner, raised children, raised grandchildren, raised nieces, raised nephews, took care of everybody. Great, big fan of the show, big fan of our activism, always supported me personally. Tremendous. Sung in her church choir with her partner. I mean, just a wonderful person, a retired nurse. But guess what happens? COVID happens. And this woman, as a essential worker, as a caregiver, someone that's about taking care of people, as a spiritual person that's about taking care of others, unretires to get back in the game to help others. And now we've lost her. So I want to just give Maria and Sarah that love, that respect. We missed them so much. And Sarah and Maria will never know how much they impacted us. Because Sarah and Maria will be in my heart forever. And my family's going to know who they are. And our friend, you all know who they are, and that inspiration, to both of your points, what is it? You throw a ripple, and so that's something I always encourage my folks that are part of this community is that we never know who we're going to impact, and we impact more people than we imagine. Karen, just your final thoughts on this conversation. I know that this is a sad time, but a time that we celebrate his legacy and celebrate people like you that continue that legacy with the spoken word and with your activism through your artistry.
Well, two things. One is that, I consider myself very blessed to have met Miguel, to consider Miguel, a mentor in terms of writing, in terms of thinking about poetry, in terms of thinking about what it means to be an academic, right? Like that all of these things, he made it possible, right? Like he showed what was possible in many ways. So I consider myself very lucky. I think it's, an incredible and unimaginable loss, but I think that it's something that, continues to, bring us together. Secondly, I wanted to give a shout out, which kind of connects to this conversation when we're talking about activism,
please,
and women and the Biden campaign, my homie, my dear friend, Julissa Reynoso Pantaleon, was named as Dr. Joe Biden's chief of staff, right? Absolutely. So this is someone who, we used to volunteer on campaigns. We're always doing the social justice work in Washington Heights, and, has now gone from, working with Hillary Clinton and then U.S. ambassador to Uruguay, and is now, we as a people, we continue fighting on. So, just wanted to kind of give that shout out there. Just tying it all together in terms of thinking about
there's some great synergy there. And we shouted out Julissa on the last show. You know how much of a fan I am of her personally and professionally. Yeah. And we're just really happy that, and to our point earlier, people say, and there's been some haters, it's nice for Julissa, but that's not the most important position. I'm like, Dr. Joe Biden's going to be very important on this education stuff. And that stuff's going to be very important for the Latino community and our children and our young people. So, and as an academic, Karen, I have to tell you, debt and all those issues. So,
please,
yes. Oh yeah, no, that's you talk about a candle we're lighting during the holidays for that one. But no, these are very important. Javier, as we wrap this up, any thoughts on, as activists watching this, that after the holidays you're going to be keeping a close eye on the president-elect? There's a lot on his plate, obviously. COVID, the economic crisis, income inequality, immigration, Puerto Rico. So just what should we be looking out for, and what can activists do to support the agenda, but also hold this administration accountable?
Well, several things. First and foremost, right now we have our fellow Latinos in Georgia are going to be decisive in making sure what happens in not only in the U.S. Senate, but in the first 2 years at least of the Biden administration. Is it going to be a friendly Senate, although a close tie, or is it going to be basically one run by opposition? And we know what happened to Obama the moment he lost the Senate. So we can make a difference, all Latinos, no matter what their backgrounds, by actually volunteering, reaching out. There are basically now phone banks happening in English and Spanish, Latinos talking to Latinos to try to activate and mobilize in Georgia. That's something that is happening as we speak. In addition to that, it is very important that we actually pay attention to how to mobilize and contact our representatives, particularly senators in key states where you have conservative senators like in Pennsylvania who may actually vote for the right person, for a decent human being to do the job that they've been asked to do. And we have the opportunity to actually influence them because they know that these are very close elections. These are very different times. So going partisan is not going to cut it anymore. So it's very important that people take advantage of those opportunities to basically show and express their support from some of the extraordinary candidates. In the case of Julissa, she doesn't need to go through a Senate confirmation process. It's more of what she actually went through and became an ambassador. But right now, we're going to have many other people like Mayorkas and the Homeland Security, first Latino, a Sephardic Latino, Cuban, who is going to be part of one of the most important agencies in the government. We have other Latinos that are in the pipeline, and we have many candidates from different backgrounds who are going to need that extra layer of support from the community. And senators and their staffers are going to pay very close attention to those phone banks, voicemails, Facebook pages, social media, you name it. They want to actually know what's happening because they know that things have changed substantially. And when you have so many states that were actually decided by razor thin margins, they are going to listen. And they're going to ask their staff, hey, what are people saying? What are they not saying? Are there any op-ed pieces for intellectuals and people in academia writing op-ed pieces, making sure that they actually do open letters to and things like that, mobilizations on campus or mobilizations online. For the average person, pick up the phone and call your representative or actually use the Facebook page and send an email or a message and let them know that you are supporting the agenda of the President of the United States, who used the word respeto to discuss how he approaches our community. And with the appointments of Julissa, with the appointments of Julie Chavez, who is the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs, La Nieta de Cesar Chavez, and so many other members of our community. Actually, a member of the GLBTQ community is now the Director of the Social Calendar Office at the White House, a Latino, who also happens to be a member of the LGBTQ community. This is an administration like no other. And the Obama administration was amazing, but this is taking things to a whole new level. And if we want to defend that, if we want that to continue, it's just a phone call for most people. They don't have to take it to the street necessarily. If need be, go for it. But right now, just letting your elected officials, particularly your senators, know that you have the president's back, that's all it's going to take for now. And if they can do that, we're on the right track.
So you bring up so many good points. Javier, I'm involved in that stuff very close, and we need to exchange notes on that as well. But that's going to be an ongoing over the next few months. Those appointments, critically important stuff that you talked about, Javier, so well. I would say two other quick things. One is that Georgia is so important, and we'll have more time before January 5th to dedicate to that discussion and bring some Latino leaders from Georgia to have that conversation here. But it's so important. Everyone watching this got a cousin, whether you're African-American, Latino, whatever, you got somebody in Georgia. You probably have 3-4 people in Georgia. It's just such a growing, bustling community. Make sure they're registered, make sure they vote. It's either we get some stuff done or we don't over the next 2 years. It's that important. And the other thing I would say is that the other big fight we're going to have, there's lots of fights. But look, this COVID vaccine, that we have to all be engaged because as activists, and Javier just talked about some of the tactics, but this is the reality of it. Biden's good intentions, what notwithstanding, you still got corporate pharma behemoths involved in this, and there's going to be state level advocacy on this because it's where do Latinos in our community folks fall in line? Are we the last ones to get it? Or is it done equitably? Are people that are essential workers going to get it relatively quickly? Are folks that maybe aren't essential workers but are caregivers? Because our community is multi-generational in our households and mixed in many ways. Is it going to be cost prohibitive for some of our folks? Are people going to get accurate information so that they understand they can trust the vaccine? Because I'm already hearing from Latino professionals saying, I ain't taking that because Trump has something to do with it. I don't want nothing, even if he's gone in a few months. So there's a lot of work we're going to have to do so that this process, which is going to be a difficult one in the best case scenarios, to distribute 600 doses of medicine in a relatively short period of time, we have to be involved so that this is done in a way that's healthy for our community and equitable, and that we're not the last ones in line. So, Karen, let people know where they can find your poetry, what you're up to. There's so much. We got to come back soon and keep kicking it. But yeah, let us know what's going on. Anything else you'd like to share?
Right now, I just putting the finishing touches, waiting on the page proofs. So my first solo authored manuscript, it's not poetry. It's more, it's definitely more, prose. It's the book for tenure. So it's actually the queer Nuyorican performance aesthetics, racialized sexualities and aesthetics in Loisaida. So it's really thinking about the queer history of the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. And, it comes out over the summer. Why am I blanking on this? It comes out June 29th.
Gotta be ready to promote, girl, when you come on the show.
I know. It's available for pre-order on Amazon. So if you just type in Karen Jaime, the book will come out. So definitely check it out. And, always grateful to be here. Wonderful meeting you, Javier. So we'll be in touch. I'm going to buy it, but I want a dedicated copy for me and for one summer, especially actually several special friends. I want that to be their gift. Well, let's hope that this vaccine or whatever happens so we can actually have book signings and readings and things where,
No
we
question.
Get out there.
No, we're going to have next year, God willing, we're going to have a live show in New York with you, Karen, to do all that. No question about it. I want to thank my great friends, Dr. Karen Jaime and Javier Cuebas, for being on the show. Rest in peace to Miguel Algarin, Sarah Rosario, Maria Perez, great people that we lost, but you know what? They're in our hearts and they've done so much for us. They deserve this time to rest and be with other loved ones in another space. I wanted to, we didn't get into it, Javier, but the Arecibo Observatory unfortunately collapsed on the island. That's a whole other conversation. And hopefully we'll have time.
Connection to Cornell.
Connection to Cornell, connection to our great friend Marcela Agüeros. Mm-hmm. The son of Jack Agüeros is a great Puerto Rican astronomer who's a professor at Columbia University, Javier, who's done work at the observatory in Arecibo. So a lot of connectivity. He's a busy guy, but we'll get him on soon to discuss this. So obviously a great loss and to the sciences and around globally and astronomy. So something I wanted to make sure we noted that's something we're going to have to address in the coming years. Also wanted to mention that in the coming weeks leading up to the holidays, we're going to have some great episodes. We're going to do a whole episode, and I'm going to bring on some of these up-and-coming pop culture, urban Latino pop culture writers, talk about the legacy of Bad Bunny and what he means to our culture and sort of this urban Latino music global movement is taking place. And on Tuesday, December 22nd, we're going to do a virtual parranda on the show. So our executive producer, Christina Vega, and I are putting together a very special episode, and we're going to do a real parranda, a virtual parranda on the show. Some more announcements to come, special guests that'll be a part of that. I think we'll have a coquito tasting portion. We're going to do, if you know anyone, Javier or Karen, that does bombas really well, we want to have a bomba contest on the show. So you're welcome to contribute ideas.
I want to hook you up with some Boricuas who do it. Actually, they even have an academy for bomba in Maryland.
Oh,
and they've been doing it for over 20 years.
Okay, so you're disqualified for being a judge, but you certainly can bring your folks on. So that's fantastic. Karen, Javier, thank you so much. We're going to wrap up the show.